even when you're studying things that are nearly 5,000 years old at least, it's important to have an appreciation for how long 1,000 years is. Okay. And you can really only get there by spending a significant amount of time with history and studying it, because you can spend so much time studying things that happen over 1 century, and then you go times 10. Oh my God. Think about if you were to spend 10 years studying the span of history over 100 years, you would really get an idea of how long 100 years is. You multiply that by 10.
It's insane.
Multiply it by 47. And that's how far we are removed from, the youngest date of the Great Pyramids.
And you were telling me last night something like there being this 27,000 year record of pharaohs that a lot of historians ignore, that it could go back like that far. How do we know that?
Well, yeah, historians ignore it. And, you're kind of alternative history researchers, like ancient history YouTubers, they both ignore it. And because I think it conflicts with both of their ideas, right? So academics, they brush off the 27,000 year kings list as being, so the Egyptians, they have these long kings lists. There's one, I believe it's the Palermo. Can we look up the Palermo stone? So just so I know that
spelled
I'm right.
Like Palermo in Sicily.
Yeah.
Palermo.
Yeah. So the Palermo stone, Egypt. I want to say it's. So this is one of the examples of a king's list. Can you read that description, Alessi?
Which one? Right here? The Palermo stone is one of 7 surviving fragments of stele known as Royal Annals of the Old Kingdom of Ancient Egypt. The stele contained a list of the kings of Egypt from the 1st dynasty through to the early part of the 5th dynasty, and noted significant events in each year of their reigns.
Sure. So this one goes from the 1st dynasty through what, the 5th dynasty? It's the old kingdom. This is documenting, the time of the pyramid builders from the 1st dynasty to the end of the old kingdom, which we're getting to 2100 BC. There are other kings lists similar to this one that we find scattered in various places throughout Egypt, and you can only assume that they were in little places like museums, kind of like we were talking about. So this is the Palermo stone, very similar to the Narmer palette. It's these small stones that commemorate things. Eventually we're going to get into these things called stelae, which is this gigantic stone billboard where things are just carved up and down. Like you have the Dream stele that was erected in between the paws of the Sphinx, and it's the first monument that actually recognizes the Israelites. It's a lot of really cool stuff here. But this is the origins of these stelae, these giant stone billboards. And it's hard to find these things, and we kind of find them in some places. So there are other similar stones like this that have these kings lists that go back 27,000 years. And so the reality of it is interpreted, I don't know, sometimes it's interpreted in a certain way, and sometimes it's just ignored. But let's say academics, they view it as, it just has to do with their mythology. It's not real. There's no significance to it. It just has something to do with their mythology, and we have to take it with a grain of salt. Mostly just ignore it. Let's only consider the hard archaeological evidence. Does that make sense?
Yes.
The YouTube, I should say, there's this, what is it called? Like the YouTube archaeology wars. That's what was said on the Joe Rogan podcast. I think that's what it is. So you have this battle right now that's happening basically since the big debate. And so, ancient history YouTubers that, kind of want to sell, you're making money doing it.
Of course they do.
You're selling something, right? And there's a difference between doing it hyper honestly and, really trying to teach your audience things that they want to know, right? Which probably isn't a great formula for being an honest person. They kind of ignore the King's List, because what the King's List does is it shows that dynastic Egyptians were acknowledging their own history going back maybe not necessarily exactly 27,000 years, and the reigns that they attribute to these certain kings, like some kings rule for 15,000 years. Obviously you don't take that part seriously, but what it's indicating is that these people, however limited their own understanding of their ancient history is, are telling you that their history goes back really, really far. Really far. And they're telling you that it is their bloodline It is Egyptians that have lived in this land for this long. It is telling you that. However, there are people, with this idea that no. It's all in everyone's YouTube comments about when you talk about the pyramids. The Egyptians did not do this. It was a previous civilizations. The Egyptians had nothing to do with it. Dude, we have bodies of Egyptians in the Cairo Museum of people who were alive 30,000 years ago. And you test their DNA and they are Egyptian the same way people 4,000 years ago were Egyptians. It's the Egyptians telling you that their history is very ancient, however limited or advanced their understanding of it was. They get to a point, it's kind of like where we were talking about how, in recent history, you can document all these things. And then the further you get, you start to get in these big leaps of time. That's what they do with their kings list. It's like, from the 5th dynasty up to the 1st dynasty, it's, it's a very clear documentation of what's happening. Then you get beyond Narmer, the first pharaoh, and then it starts to take leaps through history. And because, that was a very long time ago, especially for them, especially when during this time period, humanity is beginning to formulate how to record history. So you have these tales that are brought down, and they probably have artifacts from these very, very remote time periods where they knew the context of it, but it's lost to us today, but what they are doing is conveying to eternity. They're speaking to us from the past and telling us, this is how far back my history goes. They may not be exactly right about how long the certain little periods were. They're telling us it goes back a tremendously long way.
But if pharaohs go back 27,000 years, that is if that's true, the ramifications of that historically could be insane.
Sure.
I mean, you're talking about living through both terrible physiological effects like the Younger Dryas period or something like that, to also fucking up timelines of all the ancient religious texts, and everything, and what we know about world history to be.
Sure. And even